Please welcome to the stage Simon Delarouvier, Engineer of Societies at Consensus.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here. Hopefully everyone's settled in after the lunch. When I wanted to do a speech here at Ethereal, I thought the first thing I wanted to do was talk about something very serious, and the topic was saving the planet. But I thought that was too pretentious, and I'll leave it for another day. So I thought I'd rather just share some stories about a project that I did in 2014, which is a project that I did that launched a decentralized band and cryptocurrency. And through this, I want to just share and explore what the future of content can look like. At Consensus, by day, I'm a blockchain developer. I work in a project called Uja Music. And by night, I'm a creative, I'm a musician and a writer. And so I've always thought about the problems of the creative. This story is about how I came on the South African national news in the year 2014 for being labeled the funk virtual currency inventor. And it was quite an interesting story. But the story starts at the end of 2013. I was living in a tiny town just outside Cape Town called Stellenbosch, and if you've been there, it's got a lot of wine and a lot of students. It's a great place to live and spend my time. I was finishing my master's degree, and during that time, I got very interested in Bitcoin and blockchain technology, and was starting doing development in the space. At the end of 2013, I saw a lot of potential for this technology and was working with people in the Bitcoin space like Mike Hearn, working on payment channels back in that day. Then something interesting happened at the end of 2013 that changed my perspective on what blockchain technology will mean in the future. And that was the launch of a cryptocurrency called Dogecoin. It was this funny meme currency that had no other purpose, no technical improvements over any of the previous altcoins out there. It was just a funny dog on a coin. And it worked. People were going crazy about this. The community itself funded a bobsled team to go to Jamaica. It was just, they sponsored the NASCAR and put a wrap on it on the back. And there's this very great video where you can see this funny dog coming up into the NASCAR car. It's very, very funny. But the thing that surprised me so much about this project was that it worked purely because of the fact that this currency were meaningful as a medium of exchange to a specific community. And so I went down a rabbit hole and thought about this. This is really, really interesting, right? Could you just say that a currency is merely just a network effect of the people that are involved in it? And more directly, could you just say that the currency, the value of a currency is simply its mimetic value? So that's the question I asked and wondered, and I labeled it the Dogecoin hypothesis. I thought Dogecoin would be very important, and so I did what any respectable cryptocurrency trader would do back then, and I invested in Dogecoin. Luckily, it allowed me to take the next 6 months off and experiment as much as I can in this space, which I'm very grateful for. If people ask me, how did I get here? It's because of this funny dog on the currency. And so I thought, if this hypothesis is true, maybe we should try and experiment with this in different contexts. And so the first thing I thought, what if I just launch my personal altcoin and call it Simon Coin and just launch it and see what happens? But I thought this wouldn't be capable of producing a network effect that was valuable. So I thought, what are the things I could do? And so being a musician, I thought maybe there's something in terms of combining it with music in some form that could to test this hypothesis. And so I eventually got to the point where something else happened as well in that year in 2014. There was a very interesting comedy sketch that happened. Now, for the South Africans in the room, they might know this band. This is an Afrikaans rock band. She knows who that is. Afrikaans rock band called Fogo Feliciter. And there was a comedy sketch group that at some point in that year purely pretended to be the band, right? They went out to gigs and literally pretended to be the band itself. And I thought, this is really funny and really interesting, because maybe this is a way we could scale music in an interesting new way. Instead of seeing local bands in only your local neighborhood, what if that music could be played by similar people in a different part of the world? Anyone could be the band, right? So that was the interesting idea. So I thought, what if you combined a cryptocurrency, test this hypothesis of a network effect with the idea that anyone can be the band? You don't have to, in the same vein that decentralized networks, you don't have to ask permission. You don't have to ask permission to be part of this collective, and anyone would just make music under this band. And so decentralized cryptocurrency, decentralized band, and I thought, let's put it together and see what happens. And so due to the fact that I had time off and I could work in this space, I started working on it. But of course, I first had to get a name. During that time, a lot of the projects had names that ended with coin, Bitcoin, Litecoin, Goldcoin, whatever have you. And I thought this was not what it was supposed to be, so I had to think up a name. I wanted to sound like a band name, right? And so I went through a bunch of names, thinking about it, was walking through the town I used to live in, and some of them came up like maybe it's something like the Coin Wavers or the Hash Punks or like something like that that could represent a musical collective. And then when I remembered, hey, hang on, in the 90s there were the cypher punks, right? They were the famous cryptographers that helped get us where we are today in terms of blockchain technology. What if I changed the P in the middle to an F, right? This is the best name ever. And I thought, Simon, this is hilarious. This is going to be the best name ever. This is great. This is going to be the band name. Turns out it's probably one of the worst names I could have chosen, because if you say this to someone that has no clue what this is, how do you spell this? Right, so I would go to parties afterwards, and because I finished studying, a lot of my friends, did a respectable thing. They were accountants, engineers, got into jobs, and we'd be in parties, and people would ask me, Simon, what are you doing with your life? And I say, well, I kind of got into the music industry. And I say, yeah, so I started this band called the Cypherpunks, and they're like, what? Say again? Cypherpunks? And it was just really difficult to pronounce, and I realized during that time that, I was being that weird guy again at parties, telling people about cryptocurrencies and decentralized bands. And then people thought, they even kept asking me things like, are people going to go buy drugs with this money and whatever? And I'm just like, I'll exit that way. But, I chose the name and I had to stick with it, even though it was very hard to pronounce. The media would write and say cyberpunks, and it was just awful. The name was really bad choice. But anyway, I then started doing work in the space and trying to launch this project. And back then, it was the year 2014, which is decades ago in the crypto space. And the only way you could actually launch a cryptocurrency back then was you had to go fork Bitcoin and fork Litecoin and create it yourself. At that point in time, the only projects that were allowing you to do more interesting things were just getting started. Ethereum was still, in January 2014, Ethereum was announced by Vitalik Buterin. So there was nothing available, so I just had to go do it. And through a succession of 3 weeks of learning the codes and some techno montage of coding, I threw everything together, learned how everything works, and then bam, the Cypherpunks was born, a decentralized band and cryptocurrency. I really like the logo. It is, if you recognize it, it's a hash symbol, a music note, and the F coming out for funk. Quite proud of that logo. And so it was started. And being a musician, of course, I had to create the first song. And so I created a song called We Are the Cypherpunks, which is a noise pop punk song. I really like the song. And so I launched it. I put it out in the world. The cryptocurrency was launched. The first song was launched. And then I waited and see if I was actually just crazy. And turns out I wasn't. Cypherpunks was born, and people started submitting music. Different musicians came to the project, and they released the music under this name. They gave up their creative rights and released music under this name. People would come and upload their music. We would remix each other's music, and we would create this collective. And the cryptocurrency was being used as a medium of exchange in this community. People were tipping each other and trying to spread the value of this currency to different parts of the world. The other weird thing that happened was, for some unknown reason, I got on the news about this in South Africa. So what happened was, there was this, in the beginning of 2014, there was this media event in the town I was at, and a friend invited me to come talk about cryptocurrencies. And turns out there was someone from a radio station there and said, Simon, why don't you come talk about us, come talk about this stuff on radio? And it's turned out to be one of the most conservative radio stations in South Africa and in the language where none of these terms have even been invented in. So I thought, this is great. I rock up at the radio station and they say, no, 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 we don't actually want to talk about cryptocurrency in general. You need to tell us about your band that you just launched. And so there I was trying to explain to a very conservative market what a cryptocurrency is, using words I just had to invent on the fly. And then I had to explain to them what a decentralized band is. Friends of my mother would call her and say, we just heard Simon on the radio and we have no idea what he's doing. And so the next day, more of the news in South Africa kept calling me, and they needed to film an insert. And you can see here again the scenario where I was called the Funk virtual currency inventor. And while that looks like my desk, it's not my desk. And if you're a programmer, you would realize that that is not what a programmer's desk looks like. This was the office of the broadcasting studio. And so, being a typical insert, you had to walk in and pretend like you know what you're doing, and like sit at the laptop and like look at code and charts and stuff like that. So it was quite a fun experience. What has been funnier that I had to be on live TV as well and talk about this stuff. And as you can see, that face right there, that's the face of, oh my God, I can't believe you just asked me that if my cryptocurrency is going to be used for buying drugs. But the news picked it up in completely the wrong way. They said like, yeah, South Africa's first virtual currency. I'm like, this is none of that. It's not supposed to be any of that. Anyway, so that was a really fun experience. I got to be on TV, which is quite funny, and played along with it. So what happened with the project? It was launched in 2014, and what happened? More than 20 musicians created over more than 100 songs together using this cryptocurrency. And at its max, the value of all the coins in circulation was about $10 million. There was a period of very wild remixing and chaotic creativity that was there. People would submit a song, someone would suddenly layer over sax, then someone would come and lay over vocals, and people would just tip each other during this process. I even had friends that asked me to print a bunch of paper wallets, and they would go from backpackers to backpackers in South Africa and give it out to musicians that were playing there. So in a way, it proved to me that something like this can work. But I did learn that it's very hard to launch a cryptocurrency, and I was the only developer working on this, which is really, really hard. Kept me up a lot of nights with a lot of anxiety, trying to make sure that no one is losing money through this. We had a bunch of community calls. It was great meeting a bunch of musicians. That's like a call with the guy and his baby there, just talking music. It was fun. And interestingly, it's not dead. I haven't committed code to this project in 4 years, but people seem to still care about it. And that's the interesting lesson about blockchain incentivization, is that even last year when the cryptocurrency market blew up again, I had people messaging me again saying, we just heard about this out of nowhere, and like I want to contribute and be a part of this. And it was really fun to see that this thing still had value. And surprisingly enough, last week, 4 years ago, there was code committed that I did, and then a new team came along and started updating the code again. So the dream is somewhat still alive, and I'm quite excited about that. And that's an interesting lesson. So with this project, I want to just touch upon some interesting things about thinking about the future of content creation. There are very interesting things you can do here, and the Cypherpunks is an interesting experiment with that, and I think we can definitely do a lot more into the future. This is a virtual artist or virtual influencer on Instagram called Lil Michaela. She has 1.1 million followers, and she is just an invention of someone. So there are very interesting ways to think about it's not necessarily going to be a person or collection of persons necessarily making content. It might be this idea of a music collective where you can remain anonymous but still earn from the music that you're creating with this collective. Or it could be an AI that helps make music part of this. I published a blueprint recently that describes a purely autonomous artist, where a piece of software generates art, sells it on the blockchain, and through the proceeds, pays software developers to improve its software. So you have this feedback loop of over time just generating better and better art, and this software is not owned by anyone specifically. It's just the software makes the money. So that's very interesting. And then you also could start touching upon things like what Solarius is doing, which is a transmedia franchise where a collection of people curate story together. And so there's a lot of interesting ways to think about this. And what I learned was that the economics, crypto economics that we had available in 2014 is not what we have today in the year 2018. So there's a lot of ways to experiment again. What if you do the cypherpunks again, but you have token curated registries where musicians apply to be a part of this band? You can now go to Uja Music, plug it there quickly. You can go to Uja Music and then sell the music, and this collective can make money from the music it sells. So there's a lot of interesting ways to rethink the way we're going to think about content creation into the future, and I'm quite excited about the possibilities. And you can see the art lounge right here. I think there's a new groundswell of interest in marrying new kinds of economic incentives with art creation. So what's some of the takeaways? When I launched the project, I realized that it was very weird at the time. And now it's become more acceptable to try these things, but I still think we have to think weirder. I think there's a lot of ways we can do interesting things. And I still believe blockchain technology is going to lead to abundance of creation for many artists, where we can support their lifestyles to produce new and interesting things. And tokens are going to remain an immensely powerful way in aligning incentives. What I learned with the cypherpunks is, even though I haven't worked on this thing for 4 years, people find it again just because this token exists that represents this idea. These things don't just die or disappear. They are alive in some form. Don't launch your own blockchain. It's not 2014. I lost a lot of sleep due to anxiety of worrying about this project and trying to make it succeed. And think really hard about the tokens that you're launching. Bad incentives can be really bad. And this is still day one. There's a lot of things we're going to do, and I'm quite excited to see what's going to happen. I'm still here. After the project, I still remain interested in trying to improve the lives of the creative. I'm a musician. By day, I'm a blockchain lead at Uja Music, trying to empower artists through the facilitation of music licensing. And then I have another project called Curation Markets, which is continuing with the trend of asking how we can experiment with these economics. And by the way, there's a meetup tomorrow. Quite surprised, but it's not more than 130 people, but there's 170 people coming to the meetup tomorrow, and it's going to be very interesting, where we can talk about these new kinds of crypto economics. And that's the story of the cypherpunks, and thank you very much. Let's get weirder. Any questions? Take that as question, no questions? Oh, there's a question.
Hi, I'm Kelly with Blockouts. I just want to tell you thank you for doing what you're doing for the music industry. I come from a long line of musicians and artists. And my big question is how do you get that shirt?
So for those that don't know, this is one of the original Blockouts shirts, and it's probably one of my favorite shirts that I have. I don't think there's any available anymore. You should get the old colors printed again.
There are only 5. I have one. I know Kieran has one, and I see this one. So
we have to put it on the blockchain. Might be worth
thank you
something.
for rocking it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Cool. Well, if there are any more questions, I'll be around, probably in the art space. If you have any questions, please come ask me afterwards. Thank you very much.